What a rowdy crowd. Let's see, where's Rick? Oh, he's in the other room. Okay, folks, I think we'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening. Welcome to the Warrant Committee open hearing. And I'm John Cohn. I'm chair of the Warrant Committee this year. And I'd like to introduce the other members of the Warrant Committee. From closest to me to the far side, Jeffrey Merrill, Brooks Grenard, Douglas Lawrence, James Stewart, Robert Cox, Kathy Gilbody, Maureen Arkle, and Rich Forte. Can we flip the slide, please, Bill? Okay. Open hearing. This is the Warrant Committee meeting to present the warrant articles for fiscal year 2015. This is the year that starts on July 1st, 2014, and finishes on June 30th, 2015. We'll be voting on these articles, these warrant articles, at town meeting on May 5th. Starting in the fall of 2013 and continuing through last week, the Warrant Committee met with town departments and the educational entities, we have a few actually, to develop revenue, to develop budget expectations, and worked on revenue expectations, and discussed with some back and forth how the budget situation looked. The financial figures we're going to present tonight are preliminary, and that should be kept in mind. We think they are very close. We don't anticipate any major changes and very few minor changes, but you should keep in mind that the Blue Book will contain the final authoritative numbers and the recommendations from the Warrant Committee. A few quick comments about protocol and procedure, if I may. In this introduction, I'm going to quickly mention and then move past a number of the warrant articles that are important but essentially non-controversial housekeeping items. I will also identify those items that we will hear more about tonight. There are handouts at the back for those of you here in the room, and all the presentations will be up on the Town of Dover website in a few days. Questions are most welcome, very welcome. If possible, please wait until a presenter has completed their entire presentation before asking a question. Please come up to the microphone. This is being recorded and broadcast. Say, give us your name and the street you live on, and ask away. If I may ask you to please try to focus on questions intended to clarify an issue or perhaps asking a presenter to expand on what's been presented, what material they're presenting to you. However, open hearing is really not the forum to express strong support or disagreement for a particular warrant article. Essentially, that's what a lively town meeting is all about, is really getting up and expressing your strong feelings about something. Tonight is about gathering information, thinking about what's being presented, and then going forward from there. Finally, the Warrant Committee has not yet voted on the articles being discussed tonight. We will do so in the very near future, and then prepare the Blue Book. In the Blue Book will be the final numbers, as I said before, for the proposed budgets and other articles and our recommendations. Bill, next slide, please. At the back of the room here, we have the guidance letter that the Warrant Committee issued in total. And each year at the beginning of the budget process, generally in September, we issue a guidance letter which goes out to all town departments and the education entities at the beginning of the budget season. Two things I just wanted to pull out of that guidance letter were the two quotes here. First is that the Warrant Committee is asking that departments submit level service budgets for FY15. Department should also make every effort to contain or pare costs. And level service budgets is not level funded, it's not flat funded, but rather it's asking that departments come to us in their first pass with budgets that will enable them to support the level of services that they have done in the previous years or the previous recent years. That does not mean that some budgets haven't gone up, actually, and that does not mean that some budgets haven't gone down, because there is certain inflationary impact upon many of the town budgets. But it does mean that if an additional service was going to be proposed by any town department, that we asked, the Warrant Committee asked, that that be submitted and proposed and discussed in a separate submission. The second point I just wanted to highlight here was that the Warrant Committee had endorsed the Personnel Board's recommendation of a 2% general increase for non-contract employees, and that flows through to the numbers that we'll see tonight, but again, this impacts the non-contract employees and not those who are under union contract or other employment agreements. Okay, Bill, next slide, please. Okay, tonight's, this year's warrant articles. We have 23 articles. There are 15 articles that I characterize as annual or recurring articles, and 8 special or non-recurring articles. Looking at them a little bit differently, of the 15 recurring articles, 6 do not require expenditures, and 9 do have associated expenditures in the article. Of the 8 non-recurring articles, 3 do not require expenditures, and 5 do have associated expenditures. So let's dive down a little bit deeper and take a look at some of these. Next slide, please. Okay. Articles with associated expenditures. In the recurring class, ones that we'll see essentially every year, is Article 4. This is the operating budget. This is the big kahuna. This is where the vast bulk of the dollars are spent in supporting the activities of the town on a day-to-day basis. That's Article 4, the operating budget. We will be talking about various aspects of that throughout the evening. Article 5 is the capital budget. These are items that are periodic, relatively larger expenditures, usually things that will last multiple years, although in some cases we will be replacing things that you see often. We will be replacing police vehicles, other rolling stock, and other things, but it's usually not on an annual basis. We will be addressing in further depth in a few moments. Article 7, the accumulated sick leave for retired police. This is a fund that we maintain, and we fund with different amounts year to year, and that is to take care of the obligations we have with respect to accumulated sick leave and buyback leave that we have with our police force. This year, we anticipate that number is going to be $10,000, and I do not anticipate we're going to return to this article this evening unless somebody has further questions about it. Article 18, the reserve fund. This is the reserve fund that we vote to support fiscal year 15, to support potential emergency spending that is very necessary but is not covered. It's usually something that's a surprise, an emergency that's not covered in our existing budgets. We have not voted on that in recent years. That has been $250,000 in the context of a $30+ million operating budget. That's under 1%, so that's a number that sounds large on the surface until you realize as a percent of the what we're supporting here in town, it's not terribly large. That also I don't anticipate returning to this evening. Article 20, supplemental appropriations for FY14. Most years, I shouldn't say most years, many years that we will not need to have any supplemental appropriations. We do have one this year. And here we had an unusual circumstance where the state in August of last year came back to us and changed the minimum local contribution that a town has to make in support of their school systems, the regional school. So we will be presenting an article with more detail in it in the Blue Book, which addresses this. We need to essentially kick in an additional $44,216 to the regional school system, and that is because the state changed the numbers on them from January, when we were putting the numbers together last year, to August after the new fiscal year started. So that's a supplemental appropriation for FY14. Article 21, this is the article at the end of town meeting where we establish and we vote on the amount of free cash that we're going to apply to the budget to make expenditures and revenues meet. That number, we have an estimate of it, and you'll see that in the next presentation, but beyond the next presentation, we won't be talking about that. Article 6, 9, and 22. Article 6 is our Unemployment Compensation Fund article. That is article we see every year. Article 19, the prior year unpaid bills. That is if somebody comes to us, presents a bill that needs to be paid that we do not have encumbered funds set aside for, we have to pay them. Article 22 is the Town of Dover Stabilization Fund. All three of those articles, all three of those articles we expect to not be funding. We expect $0 associated with them these years. Okay, this is going to pick up, I promise. Non-recurring articles. Article 10. This is. I should have labeled this non-annual articles because I'm already starting with an article. Article 10. This is from the Board of Assessors. This is actually one that occurs every 3 years, but it isn't an annual recurring article. This has to do with the property revaluation and the certification that is required by the state each year. The Town of Dover has in the past hired an outside consultant to do this certification with the assessor's office. We have somebody who's going to speak to that briefly later this evening. Article 10. Article 11, the Protective Services Building Dispatch Area Renovation. This is a project that came up a few years ago, and this involves renovating the dispatch area of the Protective Services Building, and we are going to revisit that in a few minutes. Chief McGowan is going to go through the thinking and the rationale of that. Article 13, the Conservation Commission has brought forth is sponsoring an article to restart the funding of the Conservation Trust. This is something we had done in the past and had stopped funding it, and they would like to present the case, and they have sponsored an article doing that. Article 14 and 15 is the Dover-Sherburne Regional School Council's capital items articles. We have two articles in place for this. They are identical in terms of what projects they are supporting. One of them will go away at town meeting or before town meeting. They are only different in that in one case we would be paying for this through bonding. The other case we would be paying this through free cash. We anticipate, I think it's safe to say that the town of Dover would be more interested in paying this through free cash. But as a safety measure, we have this in as two articles. One will be dismissed before we get there. We'll be discussing that again in a short while. Okay. Next. Thank you, Bill. Articles without associated expenditures. Some of these articles have potential financial impact, but they don't have expenditures associated with them this year, and I think this will be clear in a moment. Article 1, the committee reports from town annual report. Usually that's not a contentious article and it goes through quickly. That's a bit of boilerplate housekeeping we need to do. Article 2 is related to the real estate tax exemptions, where we as a town accept for the Board of Assessors, we accept the state's definitions of where we can give certain tax exemptions to veterans, to other folks. Article 3, and that's one that we see each year. Article 3 sets the salaries for elected town officials. the actual dollars are authorized in Article 4, but we have to, in Article 3, set those salaries for elected officials. Article 8, highway funds. This authorizes the town to accept and apply for state highway funds. Article 9, the revolving fund accounts. This is another one we see every year. Most revolving funds, not all of them, but most revolving funds need to be revisited each year and formally voted on and accepted by the town. That is, you'll see the same types of departments in there, with one addition. The council, I shouldn't say we, the Board of Selectmen are sponsoring this article, and the Council on Aging, it's going to be proposed that they have a revolving fund established to handle the relatively modest but regular fees associated with some of their program activities and their transportation costs, and this is a much neater and cleaner way for them to handle those flows, those cash flows. Article 23 is the annual ballot for town elections. Okay, and then the three non-recurring articles. These three non-recurring articles we're going to hear more about in a few minutes. Article 12, the Conservation Commission is proposing to amend some of the wetlands bylaw, and we'll hear about that. Article 16 is the Minuteman District School Committee is proposing an amendment to the regional agreement. It's known by many people, but perhaps not everybody, that in addition to the district agreement between Sherburne and Dover, we are part of the Minuteman district school system. There's 16 towns in that. Minuteman is a vocational technical school in Lexington, and Dover kids have the opportunity to go there, and we're going to hear more about that towards the end of the meeting. Finally, Article 17. Planning Board is coming back this year with a bylaw on the medical marijuana facilities. You may recall a year ago we voted at town meeting to put in place a one-year moratorium on allowing a medical marijuana facility to be opened here in Dover. That can't, by law, by the state's mandate, we can't make that permanent. So the Planning Board has worked hard and put together a new bylaw which will address the placement of medical marijuana facilities here in Dover. Not that we're expecting a big rush on this, but it's wise to do. Okay, last slide for me. Rest of open hearing. This is what you've, okay, go lock the doors in the back, somebody, because nobody's getting out until we get all the way through this. Rest of open hearing. Article 4, James Stewart is going to do an overview of the operating budget and the big picture. Next, Don Fattori is going to, who's the chair of the Dover School Committee, is going to talk about the Dover School Committee's portion embedded in Article 4, their operating budget. Richard Robinson is going to talk about the Dover Sherburne Regional School Committee's operating budget, which is obviously important to us as well. And then I'm going a little bit out of order here. I'm going to jump down to Article 14/15. This is where one of these will be dropped by town meeting. And Dana White, the vice chair of the Dover Sherburne Regional School Committee, will be discussing and talking about the DS Regional School Capital Projects. Then we're going back to Article 5. Bob Spring, the chair of the Capital Budget Committee, is going to talk about Article 5. Article 10, Bonnie Akins is here from the Board of Assessors, who can, give you the brief overview on why we need to do this triannual certification from the state and why it costs us some money. Article 11, Chief McGowan is going to talk to us about the Protective Services Building renovation. Article 12 and 13 are from the Conservation Commission. John Sheen is going to discuss the proposed bylaw changes to the wetlands bylaws. Kate Faulkner is going to talk about the proposal to fund or begin again funding the Conservation Trust. Article 16, Fort Spalding will talk about the proposed amendments to the Minuteman Regional School District. And then finally, Article 17, Henry Faulkner will be talking about the Planning Board's medical marijuana, proposed bylaw on the medical marijuana facilities. And with that, unless we have any immediate questions, I'm going to turn the floor over to James Stewart, who is going to give us an overview of the operating budget.
Good evening. I'm going to present the operating budget and some additional information. We do it annually. It'll be the operating budget plus total expenditures, sort of an overview. So for fiscal year 15, we're projecting at this point to have a total expenditure of about $34,733,000 versus $33,400 last year. It's an increase of about 3.9%. The revenues that we're expecting, excluding the use of free cash, are $33,216,000 versus $32,207,000, an increase of about 3.1%. And the use of free cash at this point that we're projecting is about $1.5 million, down by about $80,000, or almost 5% from last year. For Article 4, which is the operating budget, the big increases this year are Dover Regional Schools, about $407,000, about 4%. The Chickering local school operating budget is about $400,000 up, about 4.5%. Decreases this year, group health insurance, which is included in the summation of insurance and pensions, is down by $144,000, almost 7.2%. And usually, or at least in recent memory, that's been increasing, so this is a rare year. The capital items and special articles this year and are about up by about $420,000 or 62%, and largely because of the protective services renovation that we're talking about. And these numbers explain about $1.1 million of the overall net increase of $1.3 million. The components of the budget, Article 4 is about 89.5%. These are roughly similar to last year's. The debt service within Article 4 is 4.5%. Capital items is about 1%. The reserve fund that John mentioned earlier, $250,000, is 0.7%. And miscellaneous items and other items are in the 1% range. This slide shows the revenue sources and expenditures. It's similar to the slide that the table that we see every year. And it shows a summary that's projected for fiscal year 15, as well as the recapitulation for fiscal years 13 and 14. And again, it's similar to what we've said, but there's some more breakout of some of the items. And you can see under expenditures, there's the Article 4 numbers, the Article 5, the special articles, and most of the other large expenditures. There are copies of the presentation in the back of the room if you'd like to look at it in detail. This slide shows the Article 4 spending by, basically by category, as we've defined it. So we list government, protection of persons and property, health and sanitation, the schools, highways and bridges, debt, and it shows basically a breakdown in the change versus last year. Again, the Article 4 budget is up by overall by about 2.8%, almost $900,000. Next. And this slide shows the breakdown in Article 4 by categories. The schools is the largest share, with both Chickering and regional being near 30% of the Article 4 spending. Debt service here includes the debt service for Dover in general, as well as Dover's Chickering School and the region, and that's about 7%, and the other items are listed there. Next slide. This slide shows a little bit of history for Article 4, and it breaks it down by the categories, and on the top you can see what the percentage increase is for those respective categories. And you can see, again, that the schools were up the largest percentage. Highway is up about 5%. And insurance and pensions as a category is down by 1.6%. And it's the next slide. This slide shows the other side of the house, the estimated revenue, which I had shown you before in the other spreadsheet. And it demonstrates that tax levies are about 80% of our revenue. Other significant items are the use of free cash, about 4.4%. And new growth is estimated to be about 1%. Local receipts about 5.8%. Next slide. This slide shows a little bit of the history from fiscal year 2012 to 15 on those components of the revenue. And you can see that the tax levy is up, projected up this year by about 4.1%, and that's largely due to new growth, plus also the 2.5% growth as well from Proposition 2.5. New growth this year is projected to be down from what was actually realized last year. Next slide. This slide shows the budget gap. So we have expenses and revenues, and the gap is covered by use of free cash. And it shows that, again, this year we're looking at using about $1.5 million of free cash. The next slide shows the history of the use of free cash as a percentage of the expenses. And you can see that this year the use of free cash as a percentage of expenses generally ranges between 4%, and you see in 2008 it was significantly higher at 8.9%. But this year it looks like it's sort of on the lower end of the range, and it's an area that in the past we've been very comfortable with. Next slide. There's been questions in previous years and about the total cost of the schools, and we had a pie chart up there which demonstrated what the schools' costs are. We thought it would be helpful to just include this brief allocation of what the school's percentage is in terms of the budget, as people found it interesting. So to reallocate the costs, what we did was look at the operating costs, the capital expenses, the debt expenses, and other adjustments, which may include state reimbursements and subsidies. Next slide. And there's just a feature of this budget. The health insurance for the Chickering teachers, for instance, is not in the Chickering school budget, but paid for by the town in the town's budget. So we add that in. The health insurance for the regional school teachers is actually in their budget, so doesn't need to be. Debt repayments is in our town budget, but not for Chickering, is not in the Chickering budget. So we've added that in. There is also a SBA building reimbursement for the building of Chickering that we receive every year that comes to us as revenue that needs to be calculated in allocating the school's cost as well. So it offsets the cost of the debt, essentially. Next slide. Some additional adjustments that we look at are circuit breaker. We get reimbursements for the state for certain special education costs above a certain level, and that can change from year to year. In fiscal year 15, that's expected to be about $700,000. This year, and $700,000, and in fiscal year 16, that would be received. This year, the expectation is that we'll receive in fiscal year 15 $536,000, which was money spent in fiscal year 14. This number generally ranges between $400,000 and $800,000. In addition, there's Chapter 70 aid, which is expected to be about $700,000 this year. And as I mentioned before, the SBA for building Chickering. Next slide. And this is the share of the budget. So when you take into account all those factors, the school-related part of our spending is about 64%, and the non-school part is about 36%. And there have been estimates out there that have been very different, but I think when you sort of rigorously look at what the numbers are, they're in the 64% range. And this can change from year to year, but that's about what we're projecting. Next slide. And just by way of full disclosure, this is the whole list of allocations. It's in the back on the presentation if anybody wants to look further. Next slide. And if anybody has any other questions, I'd be willing to take it. Otherwise, certainly willing to talk further anytime. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Before we get into the numbers, I just wanted to introduce our new superintendent, Stephen Bliss. Steve's been working with us now. He's in his 5th year, but he was our assistant superintendent for 4 years. So we were very fortunate to have an internal succession when Valerie retired last year. So he's available tonight to answer all the questions. Okay, so I'm going to just talk briefly about the Dover Public School budget. Next slide. And I think it's important just first go over some of the budget overviews, and I think some of it John and James have already covered. But we approach the budget with obviously an acute appreciation for the town's finances. We followed the guidelines set out by the Warrant Committee, and we had a desire to provide level services, but in line with our current enrollment. As James noted, we wanted to point out that the healthcare costs are not in our budget, they're in the town's budget. But at the same time, we wanted to point out, and James stole all my PowerPoint points, we do receive some revenue, so when you look at our total budget, just keep in mind there is some revenue that goes against our expenditures. Our Chapter 70 revenues for next year are estimated to be approximately $700,000. And again, having been here last year, I realized that the townspeople want to know what the total costs are for the school. So we did highlight that our capital request for Chickering for next year is $161,903. Next slide. So the school committee, we sort of look at our budget in two buckets. And the first one is what it costs for us to run Chickering. And the second part, the out-of-district, that is what the town pays for any student aged 3 through 22 who attends school outside of Dover. So although it looks like in some of the pie graphs that Chickering budget is a big number, it's really 2 components. So we have what we cost to operate Chickering and what it costs to pay for some of our children to go out of district. So together, that comes up to our $9.5 million. So our in-district operating budget, as you see, actually decreased this year, but we had a substantial increase in our out-of-district, which gave us about a 4.48% overall increase. So looking at where we spend money at Chickering, obviously the biggest part of the bucket goes to salaries. So our teachers and everyone who works at the building. And then we have buildings and grounds, our regular ed transportation, and then other purchase services and equipment. So that's where our money looks like it goes. Okay, so talking a little bit about our in-district. So obviously I noted that we had a decrease of almost 20,000. To update you on where our enrollment stands right now, we are estimating we'll have 482 students at Chickering, which will equate to 25 classrooms. Our peak enrollment was in 2005 when we had 610 students. So we are seeing a 20% decline in enrollment since that time. But at that time, we had 30 classroom sections. We now have 25. That's about a 20% reduction. So we are now at a point where we're seeing the classrooms reduction equaling our enrollment, which we have not been able to capitalize on in the past year or two, because you just have to have the right kids in the right grades. So this is where we had reductions. We obviously reduced 2 classrooms. and the support staff for that, so that's 3.5 FTEs. We had a slight decrease in some of our specials, music of 0.2 and art of 0.1. That was about a salary decrease of about $220,000. We also had some support staff decreases. We had a custodian who retired, and so we've opted not to replace that position. We cut a library aide, a nurse's aide, and a secretary. These were all handled very well by administration. A lot of these some of them were retirements, so we didn't have to, and on the teacher side too, the other teacher was maternity leave, who's not coming back, so we were able to not have to actually let people go. We had a few other little supply decreases, and then we had some staffing changes between fiscal year 14 and 15 that capitalized some decreases for us. In our budget right now, we do have a placeholder for all of our contracts that are in negotiations. We did in the last week settle the teachers. We ratified the teachers' contract, but that does not substantially change the budget as proposed right now. We have two small additions. Due to some of our internal cohorts, we are adding a special education teacher on a contracted service basis, and we are also picking up the next grade level of our world language Spanish program. So we have a slight increase for that. So we now will be having Spanish in kindergarten and first grade. We also had some increases in our transportation and some other contractual obligations. Next slide. Moving on to just understanding a little bit more about our out-of-district. We did see a 17.82% increase in the out-of-district. And if you go back to the one slide with the numbers, you can see the difference where those are coming from. Just to give a little more background, because we haven't talked about this a lot in the prior years, the state and federal mandates tell us that we have to have a free and appropriate education for all of our children that we service. There are some reimbursement. We talked about the circuit breaker, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. So there is some state money that helps us with this. We're estimating for next year to have 32 students out of district. We had 29 in the budget for last year, but we're currently have 32. We never know. That's a very volatile number of move-ins. We just never know what's going to happen. For this year, then, we had less than 5 new net out of district, and that's because we did have some kids either graduate out or come back in. But that is where the largest increase is. And we have some students moving from day programs to residential, which is a little bit higher tuition, and then just the normal tuition increase on the existing tuitions. So just to better explain what a circuit breaker is, we budget all of our numbers gross, so it's dollar for dollar, so you're not seeing anything that we're getting reimbursed for. The town is reimbursed for a portion of the costs that exceed a cap. So our cap is about $40,000. So any tuition that we incur, and it's just tuition, not transportation, that exceeds $40,000 will get anywhere from 65% to 75% back. 75% is what the state has mandated to be funded. Based on the budgets, though, over the last several years, current reimbursement has really been averaging 65% to 70%, although we are seeing 75% for this fiscal year. We're estimating the fiscal year 15 circuit breaker for Dover to be approximately $700,000. So that's what we will be receiving in fiscal year 15 for our fiscal year 14 expenses. So as school committees, we sit back and we say, how can we sort of control these costs a little bit? And Steve has been fantastic in sort of coming up with some new initiatives for us to try to keep some of these children in our school districts, because it does save us money if we can keep them in-house. So just at Chickering, we have one new and one existing specialized classroom that is allowing us to keep some of our younger children at Chickering versus going out. We've engaged a language-based specialist consultant who's working for the whole district. We are continuing to develop our RTI, which is response to intervention protocols. That helps us identify students' needs earlier, so that if we can address those earlier, they have a good chance of staying with us for all 12 years. And we're reviewing operations at all 3 districts for potential cost sharing and efficiencies. And if you've been listening to what's going on or getting emails, excuse me, we're looking at reorganizing our whole SPED department right now, which would help in numerous ways. Okay, that's a lot of information, but any questions?
Dawn?
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We sure appreciate it. Next up, Mr. Richard Robinson, who is Chair of the Dover-Sherburne Regional School Committee, will give us a budget presentation on the region.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'm from Sherburne, but come across the river for tonight. Also, really want to thank both Dover Warrant and Sherburne Advisory Committee for an extraordinarily productive and cordial relationship this year that has really made budget season almost pleasurable. It's really been terrific. You'll note there at the bottom line, it says updated March 10th, awaiting Regional School Committee approval. In fact, the change numbers here, I'll point them out, have now been approved by the school committee, so they are operable numbers for us. Thanks. We approach the budget with an appreciation of both towns' finances. That's always a difficult dance, but I think it worked well this year. With consideration from both Dover Warrant and Sherburne Advisory, as John mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, commitment to level services, that's what we took as our watchword. We have had enrollment changes. You've heard about the shrinking enrollments at Chickering. That's also true at Pine Hill and Sherburne. But we're still experiencing increasing enrollments at the middle school as that bubble moves up through us. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I think really, especially this year with Mr. Bliss's leadership, we've actually seen some very strong evaluation of opportunities for financial efficiencies, and it's really helped make this process work this year. And Don mentioned some of the special ed initiatives as well. Thank you. Here's our pie chart. You could ignore the number at the top and instead look at the one at the bottom. Total operating budget, including debt service, of $22,143,874. No surprise, the lion's share is salaries and other compensation, plus benefits, those two together making up about 75% of our budget. The exact figures of those are on the next slide, which we can go to the next slide now, are impossible to read from where you're sitting probably, but you have them on your paper. Importantly, to highlight the very bottom right corner, 3.81% is no longer the right figure, 3.49%. The change here reflecting when we proposed this budget, and in fact up to last Monday when we had to submit this presentation for this meeting, we were still waiting for the final outcome of the negotiation of the teacher's contract. That has now been done. Those figures are solid numbers for our budget, and has resulted in a saving versus what we budgeted at the beginning of the year, a savings that brings us down to the 3.49 figure. Just note on the bottom, in the bottom right there, we are 15 students lower at the middle school compared to last year, but 42 students higher at the high school compared to last year. Again, as this bubble moves through. Next slide. Some key points. We have, because of that change in middle school enrollments, we have reduced staff across 3 different disciplines to account for one full-time equivalent. We've done some creative redeployment at the high school to allow us to add some course offerings, especially an extra level of Chinese. We're now able to offer Chinese for an extra year. We've talked a little bit about special ed. And importantly, I think we like to point out we're we're making changes at the region in order to save money on the local town budgets. You won't see those savings for the most part in our budget, but we hope in the coming years you'll see some significant changes in the town budgets. We put into our operating budget the purchase of a handicap accessible van for a clear and present need. We believe the return on investment for that should be 2 years or less versus having to provide the same service by contracting out that service. And every year we use some of our excess and deficiency fund, essentially our rainy day fund or our free cash, to reduce the assessments to the town. Last year that was $750,000. We're scaling that back this year to $500,000. Our known unknowns as of last Monday, and it's just about the same this year, there are still some contracts to be negotiated before the end of the year. We have budgeted for what we feel are reasonable estimates of where those contracts will come out. But again, the teacher's contract was the vast lion's share of that piece of the unknowns. And so we're in pretty good shape, I think, as far as that part of it. The Chapter 78, we probably won't know until June. Last year, I think it was even into the beginning of July when the final reconciliation happened at the State House. The same is true for state transportation. We get, as a regional school committee, we get some money from the state for those, for transportation. The governor has proposed both of those numbers to go up. We may not see much in the way of an increase in transportation because the number of regional school districts is also going up, and that may gobble up any increase we might have seen. I think we've talked about this a bit. We probably don't need to say much more about special ed at this point, but we're looking forward to those savings. Thank you. And that's it, and I want to thank you all for your attention and for your support for the schools, and be happy to take questions.
Just 2 questions.
I'm sorry.
You want me to
Yes, I do. Thank you, Justine. It is being recorded and going out to other thousands of people here in Dover.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just 2 queries. So what is the total population in the region now, and how is it divided between Dover and Sherburne?
This is where I turn to
The
our
superintendent.
fearless leader, Mr. Bliss. He may have that number a little more accurately than I can come up with.
So actually, as of January, which we can add to, we had a total in the entire school system of 2,058 students, with this the region, Southern region, 1,174.
And what is it, about 60-40 breakdown between Dover?
Approximately.
617 Dover, 543 Sherburne, and then some districts.
So that was, just for the microphone, that was 1,173 students in the district in total, 617 from Dover, 543 from Sherburne?
533 from Sherburne.
533 from Sherburne.
And the other one is follow-up on something that came up in our Open Space Committee meeting, that apparently there's a proposed cell tower that's being proposed, as I understand it, in Medfield, but with access through Dover or vice versa, and that perhaps the region might consider putting it on the regional property, and that would be a great source of revenue. Could you tell me what's going on, if that's something that the region is actively pursuing? And I think you should use the mic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was brought to our attention that there is actually a cell tower that is being, or is planned to be erected on a private parcel of property that abuts what we affectionately refer to as the bus pad on the regional campus where the school buses are housed. The cell tower is proposed to be on a parcel of land that is not owned by the regional school district, and they're fairly far into the planning process. Our understanding is that it's a cell tower that would allow for the cohabitation of 4 carriers on this particular tower, and that, again, the planning is very well underway with a private landowner in Dover. And so there's, given where they are in that planning process, there hasn't been a lot of discussion at the regional school committee yet as to whether or not there would really be an appetite to potentially go after an RFP to put another cell tower somewhere else on campus. If the regional school committee, if we had done that, because there's some wetlands that abut the bus pad, it would have put the cell tower in a very precarious spot on the campus. So given where they are in the planning process for this particular cell tower, the regional school committee has not yet decided it at any point could go out for an RFP to also erect a cell tower. In a very practical way, it begs the question of if 4 carriers can join this existing tower or the tower that's due to be erected, I guess practically it begs the question of how much more coverage would there really be a need for on the regional campus. Thank you.
Any other questions? Richard, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to jump a little bit out of order with respect to the articles and talk about the regional school committee's proposed capital projects, and that will be either Article 14 or 15. And Dana White is kind enough to join us tonight. She's the vice chair of the Dover-Sherburne Regional School Committee.
Excellent. I believe what will go up on the screen will be a spreadsheet that may or may not be readable to the general public. So I would actually call your attention to the presentation that was in the back. If you were at the Selectmen's meeting a month or so ago, we did present at that meeting. So if you're hearing it for the second time, I apologize. But I can give you a little bit of the background as to what are behind the numbers that will, I think we're behind that on the capital budget. Anyway, while he's getting to that, I can give you a little bit of background on it, because these particular slides won't come up. In 2003, we did a major overhaul to the regional campus. A new middle school, a greatly renovated high school, wastewater facility, treatment facility, and minimal work to the gyms that were there. As a result of that 2003 work, we enjoyed a 10-year honeymoon period, we call it, with very little maintenance requirements at the school, very little investment on our part financially. Didn't get it? That's okay. The presentation in the back end will be up on the when it gets posted tomorrow.
It will go up on the website. Folks here can presentation in the back.
Great. Okay. So 10 years of honeymoon period, and then starting last year, we recognized that as things were beginning to end their useful life on the campus, or there were projects that hadn't been put in that 2003 effort, that it was time to start investing in the regional campus to make sure that we never got to a point where we were deferring maintenance that would be negative to the town in the long run. The numbers, and I'll talk about the process, but basically what we've come to is an amount that approximates about 1% of our asset value per year that we want to invest back into the campus facilities to make sure that they continue to be at the level that we want our students to be learning in. One of the things that we've taken control over the past year or so is making this more, I think historically we've looked at it with a 1-year window. What projects do we need to do in this 1 year? Now we're trying to look at both a 5 or even a 10-year window as to what projects might come to bear in the region that we should be planning for, maybe moving projects around to keep a more of a steady request to the towns and to keep us in that approximately 1% range of projects that need to be done. The process that we went through is we had worked with a consulting company called On-Site Insight, who has put together a pretty substantial project list of everything at the campus, gone through each asset, evaluated its useful life as to how long it will be good for the region, and then an approximation of what the replacement value will be at that time. We've put all of the hundreds of items that are in this project into a database that we can then move the needle, if you will, year to year to determine when a project should be done. And sitting down and working with the staff at the region, we can go down and pinpoint project by project as to when that should really be done on the campus. That allows us to look at what projects should be done in any given fiscal year, and then look 5 or even 10 years ahead to know where the different projects will land on that timeline. What we try to do is to really separate the needs of the projects and then worry about how that aggregates, and then how we might go about paying for it. And of course, this was an iterative process. I think we met with every single finance committee on both sides of the river, capital budget, Warrant, and the selectmen, so that we really understood whether we were in the ballpark of projects that might be something that would be an appetite for the town and town meeting. So where we've come out is, for fiscal year 15, we have a warrant that we'll be bringing for $315,000 that reflects 20 different projects. Most of them are in the $10,000 to $35,000 range. And then just so that you have some visibility into the next few years, we have a $432,000 in fiscal 16, $396,000, $230,000, and $450,000, or an average of about $365,000 per year over the next 5 years, or again, less than 1% of the asset value of the campus. Again, to give you some visibility, and this will obviously require a lot more discussion over time, is we do have some big ticket items that will come down the road over the next 10 years in fiscal 20, 23, and 25, and those will be around roof replacements and HVAC upgrades in the high school. Obviously not to the middle school, because that's been very well taken care of. There are obviously some caveats. That's the best information we have now. Things may move forward. If things move forward, we will do our best to move a counter project back so that we're not coming to the towns with a very lumpy request over the next 5 or 10 years. Of the projects that are on the $315,000 warrant, as I said, there are about 20 projects on there. There are some vehicles, a tractor, there's some items for the wastewater treatment facilities, door projects. So one of the things that we've done is to try to get some efficiency and some economies of scales to lump projects that might have been spread out over multiple years and bring them all into 1 year so that we can perhaps get some better costing from bids and also from execution for our staff. So there are a number of door projects, floor projects, and some painting projects. Just an aside on the painting, much of our painting is done as part of the operating budget. There are some projects that we do have to bring in scaffolding and other materials, and those are done within the capital requirements. And then for all the athletes out there, upgrades to the team and locker room facilities, in case you've been there recently. Once we had that number, the $315,000, the reason that there are 2 warrants currently there is, one is if we choose, the town chooses to go ahead and bond that, the $315,000. The other article is we were successful this year in having both the towns of Dover and Sherburne sign an intermunicipal agreement, which after a great deal of work spearheaded by Superintendent Bliss and in conjunction with both the Sherburne and the Dover Boards of Selectmen, we now have a document in place where the 2 towns can choose to pay for their projects in different ways. So if Dover prefers to pay with free cash, Sherburne prefers to bond, or vice versa, we can make our own financial decisions based on our own financial position. And that's hence the 2 warrant articles. One will be withdrawn and one will go forward based on the decisions that the warrant committee and the selectmen make as to how we should pay for our projects.
And just one clarification, Dana, the $315,000 you mentioned is actually the total amount.
Correct.
For the region's projects.
Sorry, yes.
That's okay, yeah, and Dover's share, it's always good to, see, I wanted to jump in here because I could.
There you go. If you can cite the actual percentages.
Dover's share is $171,455, but the total projects, in the article that involves bonding, both towns need to approve the total amount of money spent, and this came up before in the wastewater treatment plant. But if it's the article that involves just overpaying through cash or through our regular budgeting process, it's $171,455, which will be the proper allocation. And that's the number we should have in our mind.
Right.
It's not that we're only going to do half the projects.
Exactly. Are there any questions about the different projects or the process? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're moving back in a sense to Article 5, the capital budget article for Dover. Bob Springett has joined us this evening. Bob is the chairperson of Dover Capital Budget Committee.
It's been a very quiet group tonight. So I really hope you haven't been saving up all your questions for me. Is that what's going on? All All right. I am Bob Sprant. But before I begin, I would like to take a minute and really thank the town employees, the commissioners, committee members who have provided the information and suffered through a number of questions that we asked as we put the Article 5 together this year. I also want to thank the other members of the Capital Budget Committee for their hard work as they reviewed and vetted the various proposals that I will go over this evening. Okay, to summarize, we recommended 18 requests. One of those requests has since become its own special capital item. These requests came from 5 town departments and from the Board of Selectmen. Article 5, fiscal year 15 highlighted in yellow, totals $350,682. If the town operating budget is $30 million, that's about 1%, a little bit more than 1% of the operating budget. Most of the requests this year that we've reviewed really sort of come into kind of routine facility maintenance items, as well as vehicle and technology replacements. All reviewed requests for this year total $805,682. That's a little bit less than 3% of the operating budget. The $455,000 special capital item is the renovation of the dispatch space that Chief McGowan will talk about a little later on. So quickly, and by the numbers from the Highway Department, $56,640 to replace a 1-ton truck with plow. This truck has been in service since 1999, and we've gotten about all of the useful life that we can possibly get out of that vehicle. Along with the truck, Highway wants a slide-in sander for $15,550. It replaces a steel model with a stainless steel model, and we estimate that the new model will have about twice the useful life. Library has sort of a semi-annual request to replace technology, would be PCs, monitors, and network equipment. And we have to do that primarily to stay in sync with the requirements of the Minuteman Library Consortium that we're a member of. Park and Recreation has a request for a large tractor mower for $36,000. This was something that was deferred last year, but I think this particular model goes back to 2008 or 2009, so it's time for replacement. Police Department patrol vehicle, this is the year where they replace one of their vehicles. It's a 210 Ford Explorer with a 214 Interceptor SUV, and I've been given several rides in the 214 SUV to make sure that it met town standards. I even got to put the lights on and run the siren. Live scan fingerprint machine. Our current system is state-of-the-art manual. Paper and pads. Federal requirements want us to upgrade a bit, and this particular machine will help us meet those standards. School committee. So I broke it out into the 2 big components. One is facilities for a total of $96,884, and I have listed there each of the specific requests. And then technology for $67,823, and also under there, the specific requests. And I'll go through these pretty quickly. The energy management system upgrade is an upgrade to the software and a recommission of the mechanical systems that we use to run the HVAC at Chickering. Gym block and ceiling painting is pretty self-explanatory. I think it has never been done. So the building was put together in 2001, so it's time to freshen it up. LED lighting is going from, I think it's metal halide, which I really don't know, to LEDs, to an LED system, which is more efficient and less expensive for the outside lighting at Chickering. Gym wood floor refinishing. This is sort of a base sanding operation. Again, this haven't been done since 2001, so it's to make sure it has a good, long, useful life. Concrete repairs to the front and side slabs. Complete security upgrade, which is really changing. I think it's one set of glass for tempered glass, for tempered glass in the entryways. And then a floor burnisher, floor waxing machine that also needs to be replaced. On the technology side, there's a Chromebook pilot for $30,540. I think we'll purchase 60 Chromebooks they're made by Lenovo. It would be about 6 per class. And this is consistent with a change in how the school wants to integrate technology in the classroom. So the technology itself won't be sort of a standalone subject, but the children will use the technology as they go about their daily activities in the classroom, much like we do in work. Hardware, it's 28 laptops for teacher replacement. They're at the end of their useful life. And then an iPad pilot, which was, I think, started last year. It extends that pilot for grades 2 and 3. I believe it's 27 iPads, or 3 per classroom. From the Board of Selectmen, Carroll Community Center, air conditioning for the new COA space. I think they moved in recently. And I think for the summer months, it's a 12-month usage that it'll help make the facility comfortable. And finally, the last thing I had is the special article, the Protective Services Dispatch Area, and I'm happy to say I don't have to talk about that very much, but it's $455,000. We did on the committee we visited a couple of times the chief and went through the rationale here and did vote as the committee to support this request. I think that's it. No.
My question is, what is the useful life of all this elementary school technology? I mean, that's a lot of laptops and pads. Are they all staying at school all the time?
I think yes. Steve, you wanna?
What, do they have a 3-year lifespan or a 5-year lifespan?
Yeah, that's right.
We're using all the parts that we can from any laptops that are coming offline to keep the larger part of our inventory operation. So we have very few iPads per class in mission. It allows us to operate in small groups.
Okay, but they don't go home.
Okay, thank you
Any
very
other
much.
questions? Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Okay, Bonnie, for asking a question, you've got to come up front now. Bonnie Akins is a member of the Board of Assessors, and she was very kind to give the Warrant Committee a little bit of an education on the process, and that was extremely useful for us. So we rewarded her by asking her just to spend a few moments to talk about Article 10 with regard to the certification, the required certification.
The triennial certification of values is required by the Commonwealth, the Board of Revenue, the Department of Revenue, and they strongly suggest that you use an outside consultant to help you confirm that the values you are using to assess property are correct. So are your neighborhood definitions consistent? Are your type of dwelling, colonial or raised ranch or whatever, are you consistent with how you're valuing that? And because we have to value property according to prior sales every calendar year, and that's done by us, having the values that we use certified by the state is very important. So this triennial certification has been going on for a very long time. In the past, we paid for the whole thing out of house, and it would cost as much as $100,000. This $40,000 is well spent, and it means that our factors will be correct for the next 3 years, and it will happen right away. So that's it. And if we don't do it, the state will come in and do it and send us the bill.
Terrific. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, next up, Article 11, you've heard a little bit about. That is the renovation of the dispatch area at the Protective Agency building. And Peter McGowan, our police chief here in Dover, has been kind enough to join us. And Robin Hunter as well, the Board of Selectmen individual who has also worked on this project, is here to speak also.
So, thank you all. I'll be brief. Bob told me I had 5 minutes, so since he's in charge, I'll take the 5 minutes that I have. You can't hear me. So first of all, slide number 1. I wanted to go through a little bit of history with respect to the dispatch renovation. I'm sure to many of you this sounds somewhat familiar because we have gone through it more than once. In 1998, there was a very large renovation that was done to the Protective Agency building. That renovation did not address the dispatch area. Rather, it added garages and a bay to the fire station. In 2008, at town meeting, the Warrant Committee recommended and the town approved by a majority vote at town meeting a $30,000 study, a feasibility study with respect to what was needed in the dispatch area. In 2010, there was a special warrant article at town meeting for $400,000, which basically provided for the reconfiguration of the dispatch area, not dissimilar from what we're recommending this evening. That vote was a special warrant article. It was a capital exclusion. It was approved at town meeting by a vote of 51 in favor and 49 against. However, at the polls, it was turned down with a vote of 21 in favor and 74 against. In 2010, Chief Griffin retired, and in 2011, Chief McGowan came on. He was appointed, and Chief McGowan asked that we wait a few years for him to evaluate whether or not the reconfiguration was needed and what was needed with respect to the reconfiguration of the dispatch area. In 2014, for this fiscal year, we have vetted this project. We have looked at the costs from the 2010 meeting. We have looked at the need for this renovation, and I hope that through our presentation, we will be able to convey to the town that there is a need to reconfigure the dispatch area. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief McGowan, who's going to talk about some of the issues that we currently face with that area.
Good evening. I'm Chief McGowan from the Police Department, and I'd like to discuss some of the operations and the challenges we face. For the operations of the Police Department, the dispatch serves as communication center for all emergency calls in Dover for the police, the fire department, ambulance, EMS, highway, as well as mutual aid for surrounding towns and statewide. We also serve as a point of contact for all town agencies and boards. When they're not open, we are, so we get the calls and we'll turf them out from there. Next slide. As far as the operations, call volumes are up 53% from 1975 when dispatch first opened. Our dispatchers currently monitor a total of 23 different radio frequencies that are programmed into the console of the workstation, as well as multiple phone lines, walk-ins, and whatever else comes up during the day, and including walk-in traffic. Mandatory technology such as Enhanced 911, the CGIS and RMV computers, as well as other types, all add to the space burden, the time, and attention of dispatch officers. A lot of things have changed in the last 40 years or so. Right through another one, Bill. And the challenges we're facing now. Right now, we have two separate entrances. There's some confusion for people who aren't familiar with the building. They don't know whether to go left, right, what have you. Entry padding is confusing. If you come in one way, it's the handicap acceptable. If you come in the other way, you're down in a little gully looking up at the dispatcher. We currently also have 2 levels of single pane glass, as you can see in the picture up top and down below. And during the winter, you can just see the dollar bills flying out there from the heat that's shooting out. Neither of the glass, top or bottom, is able to be opened or controlled. Very inefficient. Next slide. As far as the logistics of the building goes, there's no separation between the lobby and the dispatch area, and this presents all kinds of issues. The separation between dispatch and regular operations between the dispatcher and the rest of the police department is a problem. And then there's a lack of security and confidentiality. If you come into the police station with any type of business at all, you're going to have an audience, whether it's the dispatcher and some officers, someone there to pick up their fire permit, someone there to report their lost dog, someone looking for directions. Whatever your business is, it's everyone's business as we currently set up. We also have a very limited working space. We're not suitable for current communications and operation processes. During the day shift change, we could have as many as 10 officers in the shift. The guys coming off shift, the guys coming on shift, guys into work details. I'm in the mix there. It's quite busy at sometimes. It can be very noisy. And that's going to be detrimental to the dispatcher trying to work. And the dispatcher has to be error-free. Very difficult when you've got 11 people looking over your shoulder, having conversations, talking, the phone ringing, and what have you. Please. We also have a lack of a secondary dispatch position. Right now, that front desk handles everything. The dispatcher is on the phone, on the computer. We'll have to slide in the chair with wheels on it over to here to get the books it needs, back to the rear telephone for the in-house calls, and a secondary computer in the back. The project here will give us a defined second dispatch area, so if we have a bad accident or a storm or anything requiring any long-term operational process, we can install a second dispatcher there to take some of the heat off. And the orientation on the positions and workspaces are not functional for today's operations. As you saw the pictures before, that dispatch is exactly the same. The faces have changed. That desk is exactly the same. We re-laminated it 2 years ago. It used to be yellow and white, but now it's blue. But that's about it as far as updates. What have you, Bill? For the cost summary, $455,000 is broken down with $350,000 for the reconfiguration of interior space. To oversimplify, we're going to take one giant area and break it down into 3. We have a reception and public area. We have the dispatch area, and then the back will be the operations area where the officers will be able to handle their daily business without interfering with any of the other things that are going on. Project management cost runs around $75,000. And temporary relocation, we can't close during the project, and we can't be underfoot, or else it'll be a 2-year project. So we're going to take dispatch and relocate it into one of our garage bays, move everything out there, and people will come to see us through a temporary door in the garage, and all our business will be transacted in the garage. Did you have this?
So lastly, the fun stuff. I forgot. Thank you, Chief. That's why we're a team here. So lastly, how are we going to pay for it? So this is a special warrant article. It's not part of the capital budget article. We would like to discuss this alone at town meeting. We are not recommending, and there is no debt exclusion or capital exclusion recommended. What that means is there will not be a ballot vote for the special article. We really want debate to occur at town meeting. We are hoping that through this presentation, we would like to encourage people to go to the open houses so that we can convey that there is a need for this reconfiguration. The reason why we did not go for a capital exclusion or for any kind of special override is because we heard the citizens of Dover who said, please don't increase our tax rate unnecessarily. And so this is part of the operating budget. However, we are being completely transparent with the cost of this project and what we believe is a need for the Protective Agencies building. So if there are any questions, we'll entertain them now. Please take note of the 2 open houses. We have one on Saturday, March 29th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., and then we have one on Tuesday evening, April the 8th, from 4 to 6 p.m. And I really do encourage everybody here and everybody listening to go and see and get an appreciation for how we're trying to reconfigure the space and how it works right now. Thank you. Nope. You're second. We have a line.
Matthew Schmidt, 27 Pine Street. One question, and that is, do you anticipate in any additional personnel costs to operate the new center?
No, sir. We do not anticipate any additional personnel costs. This is just to streamline the operational process we're currently running.
Thank you. And just to comment to the Warrant Committee, thank you for tonight's presentation. It's the best one I've ever witnessed here. And you never need to apologize for speaking slowly, because it always takes a while, certainly for me anyway, to understand what's presented, and it's all your hard work that we really appreciate. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate that too. Thank you. Justine, did you have a question? Great.
I agree. I don't think I've ever received so many handouts. I'm going to have to spend many weeks, I think, analyzing the data here, but it's extremely impressive. 3 questions. First of all, building committee. As you know, I've been involved in local politics a long time, and generally speaking, where there's a building renovation of some magnitude, and I consider almost $500,000 some magnitude, there's a building committee. I'd like to know why there does not appear to have been one on this particular article.
May I?
Sure.
This is the same project that was presented before. We didn't go through the whole process because we're using the same set of facts, the same assessment. Everything is the same. We've re-updated the numbers. We've freshened the numbers to 2014 figures and just reconfirmed the need for it. So it's the same project, just
But
represented.
people change, and I would just say, from my way of thinking, I think the process is flawed. I think there should be a building committee. Times have changed. 4 years it was defeated. I'm not sure whether I'm in favor of it or not, to be honest, but I think I would be much more inclined to hear things out if I had a wide range of people, as we do on the Warrant Committee, from various viewpoints, talking about it as opposed to a staff-up, from what I can tell, project. And that's my first comment. My second comment...
May I comment?
Yeah, John.
So this project was vetted through the capital budget process.
I understand.
So it wasn't, it was vetted, and there was a lot of discussion, from my understanding, through that process, and there were multiple visits to the Protective Agency building to understand the reconfiguration.
I understand. I don't call that a building, though, committee. I was on the Chickering Building Committee, Wildwoods Land Acquisition Committee. You know, it's a whole different ad hoc kind of thing. So we'll just have to agree to disagree on the process. The second question I had, John, and maybe I missed it, I came in a few minutes late. My impression is that we've got a lot of extra money floating around among these different funds, $1.5 million in free cash, whatever, I don't know how much in stabilization. How much is in the reserve fund at present?
Well, the reserve fund is the annual appropriation, essentially funded from free cash to handle emergencies. We may spend some of it, a little of it, or a lot of it at the end of the year. What we don't spend goes back into free cash. We're starting from, in the $1.5 million, these aren't separate funds, this is one bucket.
It's an aggregate.
It's all in one bucket, it's in our free cash account, and that is money we're spending out of it. The town of Dover enjoys a very solid financial situation, given our conservative nature and how how we estimate revenues and how we budget things. Dawn had mentioned, the schools, we see these budgets rising. To a great extent, a lot of the increases have been from the special out-of-district special. What they don't get credit for is the dollars that come back from the state and essentially flow back into the free cash position. I don't know if that's in favor of what I'm saying or what you're saying. So our free cash position, I'm not sure what your question is.
Well, I guess
but
what I'm getting at is if there tends to be, let me put it in my own pocketbook, if I tend to have an awful lot of money from investment income, I tend to be more generous in how I expend things. And the same probably relates to municipal budgets. So I'm thinking that if we ran leaner and meaner with less accumulated money in whatever you want to call it, stabilization funds, free cash, reserve, et cetera, we would really have to go to the voters more often to approve large capital expenditures. And that comes to my third point, that at town meeting, we're lucky if we get a quorum, as you all know. Most of us here are regulars who go, and we get a much higher turnout at elections. So frankly, from my point of view, I like to see items like this discussed at both. You tend to get a deliberation at town meeting where you get into nitty-gritty, and then you have, a few weeks later where people then email, they talk. It's like, pebbles into a pond. You start out with a very narrow group, and you expand and you expand. And we have only to look at last year's vote on the athletic fields.
Well, okay, we're kind of going far afield here.
But you see what I'm saying.
I do, and I do.
I would just encourage the select.
But a thread of what you're saying is about information and people making informed decisions.
Right. A wider variety.
And that's a very good point. And I think to that point would be to take advantage of the open houses. I don't think this is not a project that's in line with Chickering School, Justine. I mean, this is...
I understand, but it's still almost $500,000.
This is a renovation of a relatively small area, and it's been looked at, extensively. Warrant Committee, we're not issuing an opinion tonight, but we will be issuing an opinion. And I would just suggest, okay, now the whole
John, I was here in 1976 when it opened. I don't think I have to go because I know what it looks like.
Oh, it's actually, it's a little worn. The wear and tear is kind of impressive, so please take advantage of this. Thank you, Justine. Any other questions? No? Thank you so much. Appreciate the time and the presentation. Okay, great. Now we have two articles being sponsored by the Conservation Commission, Article 12 and Article 13. John Sheen, one of the members of the Conservation Commission, is going to talk to us about Article 12.
Thank you. Article 12 would amend the Wetlands Protection Bylaw in very technical ways. Next slide, please. The amendments are intended to make the bylaw consistent with the regulations. They are not intended and do not change the definition of jurisdictional wetlands in any way. Next slide, please. The changes delete certain redundancies in the definitions. For example, 7 definitions currently contained in the bylaw that are also contained in the regulations are being deleted by this amendment. The amendment does eliminate requirements that are no longer relevant or have never been enforced. For example, there are certain undefined terms, such as water bodies, pollution, aesthetics, which are being deleted, and there are certain criteria which have never been enforced, such as conservation district boundaries and benchmark reference within half a mile, which are now required to be on applications, but are not currently required because they're kind of pointless. Next slide, please. Details of these technical amendments are contained in a handout which is at the front of the hall, and I'd encourage you to take a look at those. Next slide, please. And finally, the amendments will make the Wetlands Protection Bylaw consistent with the rules and regs, as I've said, and it will promote clarity and consistency, making it easier for applicants to work with the Commission, and that's the purpose of the amendment. Any questions?
John, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Do appreciate it. Okay, Article 13 is also from the Conservation Commission, and Kate Faulkner is going to be speaking to that. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Let me know if you can't hear. So the town, if you go to the first slide, the town has a conservation fund which has been authorized when conservation commissions were first started by the Massachusetts general laws. And in the town of Dover, from the 80s till about 2014, currently, the fund has run somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000. And that has been through monies that were appropriated at town meetings in the past. So the appropriation history is detailed on a sheet that's available at the back of the room, but basically through 1994 to 2001, every year on the warrant there was a funding of $25,000. One year it was 30. I think one year it was even $35,000. But there was an annual funding of this fund, and then it stopped somewhat when land shot up. That was about the time when there was such appreciation, and it seemed like $25,000 wasn't going to buy you, a cobblestone in Dover, and the amounts weren't great. But it turns out that even though we can't buy land, the ability to provide a certain amount of cash has been really helpful at times. So if you go to the next slide, several times, and I'll just give you a few examples, we haven't bought the land, but we've been instrumental in holding it until monies could be raised. Next slide. So in 97, for instance, they just took $25,000, but were able to help 100 Center Street. The ones that you'll remember probably more are Wildwood, which is a 61A, I think, that came up, and there, 100,000 of that, although that was a small fraction, of what it needed to take, but 100,000 was actually given to the purchase of toward the purchase of Wildwood from the fund. And then more importantly, this summer, in the summer of Dover, a 61A property came up. As always, these are vetted by multiple town committees, including the Open Space Committee. And what we're interested in are those projects that are of benefit to more than the neighbors. So often when something comes out of 61A, it really is the neighbors who's going to benefit by keeping it free and clear. And so we don't contribute money to that. But if there's a town, like with Wildwood, which is used by many, many people in town with a variety of different interests, that's the kind of project we're interested in. The Brody property was actually such a project. Not only does it have a stream that's right at the headwaters of the Charles, but probably more importantly, there was a clear potential for a road between Wilsondale and Dedham Street with multiple houses on it. And we walked the property as part, of our investigation, and could see easily that it could be a fairly dense development. So we felt that its value was probably worth more to the town than even the land itself. So we provided seed money, and that allowed the rest of the money to be raised in a fairly short period of time. So right now, if you go to the next slide, we have $27 in the conservation fund. So we are at the point where you could buy a cobblestone and nothing more. And I think we need to ask the town whether they want us to be able to be flexible and nimble and contributory when things come up that might be important in terms of those goals that have been outlined by Open Space and by the Long Range Planning Committee. So what we were looking for is just simply replacement of the $150,000. I think we were thinking in $25,000 increments, but I'm really open. I think the whole Conservation Commission is open to advice on what you think might be the best way of approaching that. So whether it's, 50 over 3 years, 25 over 6 years, 0, forget it, we don't want that nimbleness. I think we've seen it useful, not too often, but very useful when it comes up. So we're open to questions and to suggestions.
Any questions?
One moment, you want to explain to people, I know what it is, what 61 is.
It's 61, by the way.
Right. So there's a lot of land in Dover that is temporarily protected. So in other words, it is either under forest or agricultural management, and in exchange for developing a plan or keeping some sheep or selling, selling agricultural products, the tax rate is reduced because the land is, sheep don't go to school, and so the use on the town is great and worth a reduction in tax. So as that generation starts moving out, or the next generation comes in and tries to figure out what to do with the land, we will see these lands come up, either 61, 61A, all temporary conservation restrictions. And at today's development prices, it is absolutely worth paying the penalty to break that conservation restriction and to develop the land. And when a piece of land is offered to the town first, as it must be, then the town has a certain time frame in which to respond to that request. So this land that came up was, in the summer in Dover, but we were meeting, so.
Yes, please.
They are not forever. They last for a maximum, some of them are just a year at a time, some of them are 5 years, some of them are 10 years.
Right.
And if you keep your land, let's say for the 10-year one, which is the forestry, if you keep it for the 10 years and do not renew it, you can sell it after the 10 years without going to anybody. But it's if you go to sell it before that 10 years is up, you must give the town right of first refusal. Right. And by putting it out sooner than 10 years, then you are responsible for back taxes as well. So it's fairly complicated, but it's not in perpetuity.
Right.
Fine. Good.
They're temporary restrictions.
Any other questions? No. Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay. We're getting there. Next, Article 16, and this is the article I mentioned earlier with respect to proposed amendments by the Minuteman Regional School District Council, or School Council. Ford Spalding is the town of Dover's representative to Minuteman, the Minuteman School in the regional district. And Ford, take it away.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody. Just quickly, Minuteman is a career and technical school. It's up off of Route 128. The student spends half of their year in academic courses, very similar to Dover Sherburne or any other traditional high school. 100% of our students pass the MCAS exams, which is not too bad considering over 60% are on special ed type programs. The other half is they spend their time in a specific field. And today at the Minuteman we have a variety of biotechnology courses, robotics courses, engineering courses, in addition to cosmetology, in addition to culinary arts, etc. I will tell you, it's an amazing experience to see what happens up there. In 1973, the district was formed. At that time, the state paid 100% of the building costs, and they don't do that anymore. Dover joined in 1979, along with a few other communities, and that's rounded out to a district of 16 towns, which in itself is a huge challenge because of the demographics of the towns. The reason for the proposed change to the regional agreement, which was originally in 1973, mainly is to attract new cities and towns to the district. That's the primary purpose. Currently, our enrollment is 751 students, but the campus is run 365 days a year, and in the evenings. We have evening courses as well as summer programs. The building is hardly ever vacant. Roughly 60% of the students come from in-district towns, and the remaining come from a variety of towns, of which the majority come from Waltham, Woburn, Medford, Watertown, and Boston/Cambridge. Under current law, the out-of-district towns that send students only pay for operating costs, and those operating costs are determined by the Department of Education, plus some transportation and special ed is added into that. They pay no capital costs. So if we were looking at a building, which we are, the out-of-district towns would not pay currently for any capital costs. Minuteman is currently in partnership with the MSBA on a major building project. The building, which was built in 1973, has had some minor renovations to it, from minor work to it, but nothing substantial. But the building project will not happen unless three things, or parts of three things, happen. One is we need to attract larger cities and towns into the district, so they continue to pay operating costs, but they would also pay capital costs. Through legislative action, we are hoping to increase our percentage of MSBA reimbursement from a 40% base, which is what we get now. We have not worked through all the other criteria, which could probably get us up to about 50-51%. Let's look at 40% now. We are working to get it up to hopefully a 70% reimbursement, and there is a Senate Bill 228, which this town has supported. Senator Donnelly has that up in the Hill, and we're working through that process. We're also to allow districts, out-of-district towns to pay for capital costs, and we are working with the Department of Education on that. This proposed agreement moves us, we feel, in the right direction, while at the same time it allows some smaller communities to opt out if it so desires. One of the things that is attractive to larger communities coming in is proportional voting. When I was in the Dover-Sherburne Regional School Committee, I was totally opposed to that. I'm still opposed to it. However, in this instance, I think it's an absolute necessity. When you have a town like Arlington that pays approximately $7 million in education costs, and Dover pays $37,000, it's a little hard to say why we should have the same equal vote, which we do today. But in reality, looking at the last 5 years, the votes in the school committee, there wouldn't have been any change. Basically, proportional voting would not have changed any of the votes in the last 5 years. It allows for districts an easier pathway to leave. That's not only existing towns, but new towns coming in want to be able to see that avenue at some point in the future. This does that, in order to leave today under the current regional agreement, 100% of the towns, all 16 towns, must vote to allow a Dover to leave. Under the new agreement, it'd be 51% of the towns would allow a Dover to leave. We think that is much more appealing than what we have now. So why should Dover consider voting for Article 16? Given our enrollment history, Dover parents have shown little interest in taking advantage of Minuteman's academic, career, and technical education for the children. So why should we be expected to pay a large capital cost for our building? Secondly, to remain in the district under the current agreement, again, you need a 100% vote of all the communities. Under the new proposed amendment, you'd need 51%. And if the Dover decided to vote at a town meeting, 2/3 of the town meeting voted to leave the district, and let's say the other towns didn't, you are protected. You wouldn't have to pay capital costs for that project from the time that you received approval. My recommendation to you is to vote yes for the changes in the regional agreement, that because of the allowing you to leave without 100% approval. My suggestion is to vote yes today at the annual town meeting coming up. A new project that we're working on, I'm actually chair of that project. That project would not come before any of the towns until the spring of 2016. So my suggestion is you vote 2014 for the agreement, 2015, if you feel that you don't want to be a part of the district again, the town votes at an annual town meeting. If 2/3 of the town meeting vote to opt out, and 51% of the towns allow you to opt out, and you get approval from the Department of Education, which you need to get that approval today anyway. Under Chapter 74, if a student in Dover Sherburne High School wants to go to Minuteman, you cannot deny that student access to that school as long as that student is qualified to get in. So that's important to know. That's pretty much it. So that's where I am. Any questions?
I'm totally confused. No, I don't mean to be joking.
Use the microphone, Justine.
Why would anyone let Dover get out of the district?
There are currently 4 communities that are seriously looking. Those 4 communities have a total of about 19 students in there. The amount of money that they would contribute to a building project is minuscule. When you can look at Waltham, if they could bring a Waltham in, which is, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's around 30 students. They'd much rather bring in a community. So yes, they will let you go. And right now, the school committee is very interested in allowing communities that want to leave. So the timing is right. And the communities that we're talking to, the selectmen, are also, the timing is right to do it now. To wait might not make sense. Waiting 1 year is not bad, but if you decide, wait 2 or 3, it might be a problem. Economics is really, let's bring in larger communities that use the school district rather than the smaller communities that don't use it.
So will you be sponsoring the bill next year to withdraw?
Would I? I don't know if I will. I think that would be up to the town. I would probably, sitting here right now, I really can't answer your question, but I do sponsor this. I like a little bit having Dover have to, really start taking a look at sending students here. So that's a wrong question to ask me as a school committee member.
Any other questions for the board?
Great. Thank you.
Did you? Yeah.
Good evening. Jim Dawley, one of the selectmen. Thank you, Ford. I know it's a very contentious issue, and you've done a lot of hard work. This amendment to the agreement has many moving parts, with possibly huge financial considerations to the town of Dover in the near future. First and foremost, it's very important that it be pointed out that the Board of Selectmen in no way want to make decisions that would hinder a family or a student's decision to attend Minuteman. It's a great institution. We are not in the position right now, though, to opine or give our opinion as to this new amendment because, again, there's a lot of moving parts. We're waiting for Minuteman to provide us with better financial scenarios and what it would mean to the town of Dover in the near future. We will endeavor to get that information, and we'll give our opinion before or at town meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, Article 17, and this is our last item for this evening, unless somebody wants to bring something else up. Henry Faulkner, a member of the Planning Board, is kind enough to join us this evening to give us a sense of what the Planning Board is proposing in Article 17.
Right, and there is a one-page handout at the back that summarizes this, which you're welcome to take a copy. This is a result of a ballot question in November of 2012, statewide ballot, that approved this allowing medical marijuana facilities. And the new law took effect early in 2013, and it allows for a total of 35 facilities statewide, 5 per county. And if you think about it, it's not terribly likely that someone is going to want to locate one here in Dover. However, we should be ready. And it could conceivably, these numbers could be expanded in the future. And a facility can grow marijuana, or it can sell it to qualified patients, or both. In the initial round of applications, I think there were 180 applications, and so far 20 have been approved, none in neighboring towns. Let's see, 20 have been issued. It also became clear early last year, 2013, that a town does not have the option of banning this, but they could have a moratorium for a year. So that's what we did last year at town meeting. We passed a moratorium for a year. So this time is when we should adopt regulations allowing for these facilities, but controlling them to minimize any adverse impact. And if we pass it, let's see, that the moratorium extends up to the end of July, and then the Attorney General would have to approve it, and let's see, I think it isn't until the summer of 2015 that anything could actually appear. So we've adopted this bylaw, which is a change in the zoning bylaw, allowing these facilities in certain districts. And let's see, I think it's on another page of this, the summary. They're allowed in the business and the medical professional district, but not within 200 feet of a school or daycare center. That limits the area a lot. So it's near the center of town, has to be in those two districts, but it does not preclude it. It doesn't make it, you know, a few square feet somewhere or something. The facilities must have a state license and are allowed by special permit issued by the planning board. So this would have to go through an approval process, and there are quite a few things that we're stipulating. Hours of operation are basically daytime, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturdays and Sundays. Minimum of 2,500 square feet, maximum of 6,000. We have to know who the owners are, completely understand that, and we have to have a bond that would allow us to take down the facility if it basically stops and everybody disappears. Any questions?
I'm just wondering if you could give us maybe a visual on 200 feet. So for example, if the Dover Market were to shut down, go out of business, would that be within the allowed distance of a church or a school?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm not sure. I don't have maps that show with me tonight that show where it's allowed. So I don't know if the Dover Market falls in that or not. But that would be towards the upper end of the square footage that would be allowed. I left out one important thing. The facility must be in a building. So even if it's growing indoors with lights, and it has to be, you know, have security. So there's not theft.
And the second question is, why is the square footage maximum so high? And sort of what you're thinking behind having a minimum square footage?
Well, we didn't think it was a good idea to have a really tiny operation just selling. And if you're growing it, 6,000 square feet probably isn't very big at all.
Can we accommodate 6,000 square feet in Dover Center?
Well, I'm not sure what the market is, but I think it's something in that area.
And when you say you have to know the owner, what does that mean? What
We
do you
have to know the names and addresses, contact information for all the owners, and that if they're entities, then the owners of those entities, back to individuals. Human beings, yeah, so we can make contact with them if there's a problem.
Thank you.
Andy, I've got a question. So the state got into a lot of trouble because they granted license and there wasn't a paper trail of town approval. Is there a town approval process? Do you know?
Well, this will create a town approval process.
So it'll be planning board. That will be the town approval process.
Right. Any other questions?
Terrific. Thank you. Appreciate the
Thank you.
presentation. Okay, with that, unless somebody has any other business they'd like to bring forward? Bonnie, haven't had enough?
Question about free cash.
Yes.
Free cash is approaching $6 million, which is approaching 20% of the budget. And the state guideline is 5 to 10%. And I was around at the time that approach was instituted, to increase free cash so that it would be at least 5 and hopefully between 5 and 10%. But now the apple cart is overflowing. And I'm wondering why there is not a recommendation to add $1 million to the unfunded post-retirement benefits, which was funded with money from the oil spill, but is not nearly adequate at $1 million plus less than 1% interest over the last how many years. So that's my question.
We do allow for citizens petitions, and I'm being a little facetious, but that's yeah. I would need an education in that. I believe we need a warrant article on that, but it is a very good point.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
It's too late for the citizens petition. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, no, this year. Yep. Okay, thank you. Anyone want to make a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the presentations, everyone.